The Florida Podcast Network, the voice of Florida.
From Mallory Square in Key West to the Governor's Mansion in Tallahassee and all points beyond, you're listening to the Florida Beer Podcast, powered by FloridaBeerBlog.com, your source for all things related to the craft beer community in the Sunshine State. And now your host, Dave Butler.
Welcome back to a barrel-aged edition of the Florida Beer Podcast, powered by FloridaBeerBlog.com. This is Dave, your host and author, and today we're going to go ahead and visit some of our distilling friends here in the state of Florida. And I will say that distilling is really starting to make an impact when it comes to Florida's craft scene. We're going to be heading back to St. Augustine for this. And if you have never been to St. Augustine in the past 10 years, first and foremost, what are you waiting for? It's so much more than just that field trip you took in fourth grade. And second of all, the homegrown, home-owned shopping scene has exploded in recent years, and it's always great to shop local. And we were very happy a few episodes ago to feature our friends at Ancient City Brewing, as well as St. Augustine Experiences, the absolutely fantastic tour guide. And of course, there's much more than that to St. Augustine. The Hippo is located there. If you've never had their ice pops, that is absolutely fantastic. If you're looking for jewelry, we're actually big fans of J.R. Benet right on St. George Street. If you're looking for something interesting to do, we always like the Pirate and Treasure Museum just across the street from Castillo de San Marco. And of course, my favorite store in all of St. Augustine, Happy Pappy's Glowing Balls. Trust me, you'll be glad you went. But in the past 10 years, you've also seen another entity that has sort of taken over in terms of interest and buzz with not only tourists, but locals as well. And that is St. Augustine Distillery. They are housed in a historic building that over 100 years ago used to be an ice plant for the St. Augustine area, and are now creating a wide range of spirits that not only can you purchase there at the distillery itself, but are also available around Florida and a little bit beyond. They are a can't miss location. Even if you've been there, it's worth it just to kind of go back and drink in all of the atmosphere and the history and some absolutely fantastic spirits. And they've got quite a lot of history behind them. So we're going to sit down with Chief Operating Officer Will Hensler and production lead Zach Wildrich to really talk about who St. Augustine Distillery is, talk about the building, because that has a lot to do with not only the history of the distillery and the history of St. Augustine, but also the image that the distillery has and puts forward. Plenty of discussion over some of the spirits that they had made to begin with, and all of the amazing bourbons that they are finally releasing now. Have some awesome additional pieces of information with new spirits that are going to be coming out very soon that you'll probably first hear about here, and just a lot of other great things that are coming from one of our absolute favorite distilleries, not only here in the state of Florida, but in the world, probably. So once again, Will Hensler and Zach Wildrich from St. Augustine Distillery. Enjoy. To start with, actually, let's backtrack, because if you take a look at St. Augustine for many, many, many years, when it came to production of spirits and whatnot, obviously you had San Sebastian there for a very long time. And in terms of beer, it was really just A1A Ale Works. What about St. Augustine led you to believe that this was the right place to build a craft distillery?
I think more than anything, it's tourism, right? If you want to start a distillery, a brewery, a winery with any kind of guest experience or tour element, you simply need people. And I think when it comes to distilling in general, a lot of brands make the mistake of kind of setting up shop in an industrial part of town. Rent's cheaper. It's cheaper to do a build out for the infrastructure you need and create a manufacturing operation. But the beauty for us has always been getting a chance to expose visitors to what we do, right? You come in, you get to see Zach and the crew actually making the bourbon. You get to taste it on site at the facility, and it's just a more complete experience. And I think that's something our founders got right from the beginning. Neither of them are from the whiskey world, but they'd been involved in St. Augustine, particularly in the tourism world, for quite some time. And they were close with Charles Cox, the owner of San Sebastian Winery, who was offered a lot of sage wisdom and said, look, it starts with making a good product. You can't have a good brand without a good product. But then from there, it's creating an experience that will create brand evangelists, right? People are going to come in, they're going to fall in love, whether it's an association with St. Augustine and we're kind of a keepsake, or an infatuation with the products we make and what makes us unique and different in terms of Florida spirits or national spirits. And then from there, hopefully you have a vehicle to continue to provide them the product.
No, absolutely. It's funny that you mentioned location, because not only is the location very close to San Sebastian, it's maybe a 5-minute walk or just one stop on the trolley, but the location itself has a lot of history. So let's talk about not only what did the building used to be, but what kind of condition did you find it in, and what all did you have to do, as you laugh, to convert it from its previous home and probably the state that you saw it in to the very large, lucrative spirits distillery that we find today?
Well, that's a fantastic question. I'll start by saying some of the best advice our owners got when they got started is, if you're making a brand, you need 3 things. You need good juice, a good bottle, and a good story. And the story part is really where I think the building became part of our brand. We operate in Florida's first commercial ice plant. It was actually built as a small little power plant in the early 1900s. Shortly thereafter, it was converted to manufacturing block ice. And most of this was used to transport seafood on railways coming out of St. Augustine, but also to provide ice to the folks who lived in St. Augustine at the time who had ice boxes. This is all before refrigeration. And it ran like that through the mid 1900s, and kind of had a series of businesses coming in and out before our owners actually purchased the building and set about rehabilitating it. And the businesses that were in before, kind of standard office spaces, they put up sheetrock and stuff like that. But we knew the facility itself would be part of our brand. And you see it if you look at any of our bottles, the image of the restored ice plant is carried on the package. So it was a 2-year process to restore and kind of renovate the facility to create our distillery. And some of that is building out for your distillery, running pipes, running trench chains and stuff like that. But a lot of it was just restoring this facility in a way that would preserve the original charm and character. We always joke that it would have been a lot easier to tear it down and start over, but where's the fun in that? And it's become part of us.
It being an ice plant, obviously you would have to have some sort of water and drainage. Did that make things just a little bit easier than if you were to go into an industrial park and have to cut and build all that stuff out yourself?
Yes and no. I mean, water flow to the building is there, but it's never going to set up the way you want it, right? Where you want to put your still or your mash cooker isn't going to correlate where the ice and manufacturing equipment was. So it was pretty much a tear down and kind of start from scratch. But the walls of the facility, the flooring, the ceiling, the original bridge cranes that were used to harvest the ice, all that's still there. When you come to St. Augustine Distillery, you can see what it used to be. And matter of fact, where Zach and his crew make our bourbon every day, that's the ice manufacturing floor. They're standing right in it.
And one of the gentlemen that we'll talk about a little bit later as we get into rum, his name's Danny Rodriguez, and he is literally our day one employee. Not as in just like the first hire when we got the doors open, like he helped rebuild this entire building. So one of my favorite things to do is to show up to work a little bit extra early before everyone else gets there and gets to talk. And I get to chat with Danny and, what was this like? What was building this out? What was here before? And he goes, oh, man. And then he tells me a story and it's great.
Did they find any sort of surprises, both in terms of, I guess, structural issues or artifacts left over from its previous incarnations during build out?
Definitely both. I mean, we discovered a lot about the building going through the Florida Power and Light Archives, who was the original owner of the facility. And we still have a great partnership with them today due to it. So we were able to learn about that there was actually railroad tracks coming straight in the facility to pull the block ice and a lot of things that we kind of didn't know going into the project. But through the rebuild, you discover a lot, right? Just kind of getting an understanding for how the equipment was laid out. And it's unique, but we're still learning about it today. I mean, I had our IT company in a while ago, and they were one of the businesses that had a small office in there during the off years, and they got to tell me a little bit about what it was. And they were actually located in what is now the bar and restaurant adjacent to our facility. And it's neat. I mean, it's, over 100 years later, and this thing's still telling its story.
That's amazing. Now, you are the first distillery in St. Johns County, correct?
Since Prohibition. We don't have great records, but there was a lot more distilling occurring before Prohibition. But
Gotcha.
we opened, we were, to our understanding, the third craft distillery in the state of Florida since Prohibition.
Yeah. I would say first legally.
Yeah.
Okay. So what was that process like? Because St. Johns County, the modern people that work there didn't know how to open up a distillery. St. Augustine, this is the first time that they've had a distillery within the city grounds. What was the process of working with both of those organizations when it came to pitching the idea, getting the buy-in, and getting all the stuff signed off for this rather momentous project?
I cannot say enough positive things about the city here. This is before my and Zach's time with the company, but we learn about it every day from our co-founders, and they were just so supportive of the project from the beginning. They believed in the idea. They thought it would be a unique thing to St. Augustine. And at this time, St. Augustine was really just kind of revamping and developing its kind of culinary prowess. And now it's a part of a visit, right? It's not just history here anymore. You go and have a great meal at a wonderful restaurant, get some great cocktails at a great bar, and hopefully visit a distillery or brewery while you're here. So, everything from working with the city themselves to local fire marshals to make sure the distillery is safe and operates safely. We can't speak highly enough about them, and they're still partners of ours today.
That's amazing. So as the distillery was about to open, you've got two kind of different business pathways that you sort of both do very well. One is distribution. Obviously, you're statewide. Are you actually distributed outside the state of Florida, or is it just within the Sunshine State?
We're available in Georgia as well, but not to the same degree as we are in Florida, primarily distributed throughout the state of Florida.
Okay. But you obviously, and this is something you mentioned earlier, was the tourism aspect. You are a stop on all of the trolley tours. You advertise heavily in the tourist magazines and so on. Do you see both of those kind of going for different groups? Is there one that you really wanted to focus on more than the other? How do you sort of juggle both getting the locals in local liquor stores down, say by me, where there are no tourists in my little city, versus the heady flow of transient foot traffic that you get at the distillery itself?
I think the two kind of support each other. We receive a lot of visitors each year, but a surprising amount of visitors at St. Augustine are Floridians. Right? It's a perfect day trip. You come from Orlando or Tampa or whatever it is. Maybe you stay a couple of days. Maybe you're there for a day. So we kind of view our tour as like the marketing engine that gets people excited about the brand. So hopefully you come, you visit, you buy a couple bottles directly from us in our gift shop. But when you go back home, when you visit Total Wine or ABC or Publix and you see our products again, you'll remember what you enjoyed and the great experience you had at the distillery. And we really think that's the vehicle through which we create customers in the wholesale market.
I think we're really great too at these events that we do where we have great tasters like Todd Shaw, who goes out and he goes to Total Wine, he gets people excited, he talks with them about it. We also focus very heavy on education. So we offer things like the Certified Bourbon Steward program. We have several events you can do at the distillery as far as tastings, food pairings, the history of bourbon. And then, like, for example, even tonight, I'm going to an event to help kind of curate and talk about a St. Augustine distillery spirits and food pairing. So we have a lot beyond just even the trolley too, which is great at bringing in both the locals and the tourists, but also, to more of a local community aspect, the people who are going to shop at Total Wine regularly, or, the distiller's is only 30 minutes away from my house. Let me go check out this class. I think we provide a lot of great opportunities to get everybody excited.
Yeah. And that's what we're most passionate about is, education and bringing people into the fold. We all have encountered a bourbon or a beer snob in our lives, and that's the opposite of what we are, right? We want to be welcoming and engaging to people of all backgrounds. And whether it's in the distillery, Zach mentioned a couple of classes that we've launched within the last year that are really, really great. And I think outside of Kentucky, there's really not much up to this caliber that you can enjoy to learn about bourbon and spirits and the manufacturing process. But we extend that, like Zach said, to retailers who allow us to host an event. So be it, Total Wine, ABC, whatever, we'll have one of our sales reps or brand ambassadors out there really teaching you about our products and what makes Florida bourbon unique and worth trying. And that's what brings us excitement, and by consequence, it gets other people excited who want to enjoy the brand.
It's one of the
And
best.
I'd love to. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no. Yeah, I was just piggybacking off of what Will said. I said it's one of the best consequences. Get people excited about bourbon.
It's kind of awesome. And I remember going to I'd love to actually stop and talk about the education aspect of what you do for a little while, because when you first opened, I remember going with my wife and you had the tour, there was the video, and there was a lot of, it didn't go straight to the samples. It was, this is what this is who we are as a concept and a creator. It seems like it's been a big push for you. And I guess my first question is, with the people that are coming to the events, with the people that are coming to the distillery, that the people that you're speaking with out in the field, do you find that these stories and that information resonates and provides more appreciation just for your product in general and I guess spirits overall?
I would say so.
I think it depends on the consumer, right? We have a kind of a myriad of tour options at the distillery. And like you said, Dave, back in the day, we just had one tour. They were kind of on a time schedule. You'd come in, spend a half hour with a tour guide. And at the end, we'd wrap up with some cocktail demonstrations and off to the gift shop you went and hopefully took home some Florida spirits. But through COVID, we were forced to switch to this self-guided tour model, like you saw a lot of businesses doing. And we really didn't expect a positive reaction, but we got one. And what we heard from folks who were repeat visitors is, look, I don't always have the time. I'd come for a tour and your next tour was an hour and a half away. The tour itself's 30 minutes. Before I know, I spent half my day in St. Augustine at the distillery. And I love you guys, but there's a lot to do here. These days, we've maintained that self-guided tour, though it's complemented with well-trained tour guides who are going to demonstrate each cocktail along the journey and some kind of exhibits that are going to teach you about production, almost like a museum tour, if you will. But this is accompanied with these guided experiences that tend to be more on the educational side, right? So during the day, we may have a bourbon class or a pairing class or cocktail class in the evenings on the weekends. And we think we've kind of got the best of both worlds there. So if someone is a spirits aficionado or just a really curious traveler, you can stop in and learn a lot. If you're here with your kids and you want to fly through the distillery relatively quickly and still taste some great stuff, we've got that option too. So I think it was kind of a forcing function through COVID to develop what I would say is a more breadth to our tour offerings, but it's really been a positive thing because we think for the folks who want to learn and really take a deep dive, it's better than it's ever been. And for the folks who just want to taste some cocktail samples and maybe get back on their way, well, we still have that option. You can learn a little bit while you're here and it's not going to take all day.
Absolutely. And that's one of my favorite things, just continuing on with what Will said, is really at any point in our distillery tour, from the very front door to right before you leave the gift shop, or even if you catch one of us outside, every single one of our team members on both the retail and the production staff are certified bourbon stewards. So you can ask anyone in there a question and we should absolutely be able to answer that for you.
And actually, that's kind of amazing because that's a time and resource commitment on your end, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah,
so why would it be so important if what most people would see, oh, here's a person in a gift shop, I've got a couple bottles, I'm going to ring it up and they'll check me out and put it in a box and I'll be on my way. Why is it so important to you that every single person goes through this kind of awesome sounding certification?
Yeah, if you haven't done it, Dave, we need to get you up to do it. We're running them regularly, typically the last Sunday of every month, and they're usually booked out about 3 months in advance. In September, we'll have a big push because September is Bourbon Heritage Month, so we're going to be doing kind of a slew of those courses. But we got linked up with those folks. It's a group called the Stave and Thief Society out of Louisville, Kentucky, who is fantastic. If you get the chance to go up and take the course in person with them, I recommend it. It's a great experience. But we got kind of latched on really just as a staff training element because this is specialty stuff, right? It's like you're selling supercars. You need to know about it. Mm-hmm. And we want our staff to be able to speak on what we create. And we like to say we hire based on attitude versus anything else, which means we might get some folks on the team who have no background in alcohol or craft spirits or anything like that. But if you've got the right attitude, you can treat people with respect and be welcoming, we can teach the rest of it. And Zach's a great example. I mean, Zach is our production lead and probably has more certifications and actual education and experience than the two guys above him, just because he's a curious soul and we like to support it. So I think it just ties back into wanting to make sure our guests have a good experience. And there's no better way to do that than have nice, well-educated, well-trained people who are going to ensure it.
Absolutely. And when you know about the product a little bit more, you have more to understand, you can appreciate it more.
Right.
That's amazing. So let's go back to the, obviously we're going to be talking about bourbon because there's a lot of different things to talk about when it comes to the bourbon, but speaking with other distilleries, when they first open, they concentrate a lot on the clear spirits, gin, vodka. I think you did have some rum relatively close to the early days. When talking to others, sometimes I get the feeling that this is just a quick recipe to get the name out there, to get a product out there and start building the real liquors, the real products. What was the focus on creating gin and vodka and so on for St. Augustine Distillery? Was it just a quick dash, or are there certain aspects of it that you really tried to utilize and create when crafting those recipes?
That's a good question. So if you're making a whiskey brand, whether it's bourbon, rye, Scotch whiskey, whatever, there's kind of two ways to get money coming in the beginning, right? You can source whiskey and blend and bottle and sell on your own, which we think there are some great brands making some great products, even non-distilling producers making some great products. When we opened our location, over a decade ago, the industry perception on sourcing was a little bit negative, and Zach's kind of nodding his head. And we've seen that change over the last decade, right? People look at producers like MGP and they look fondly and say, I'd love to see what a craft producer can do using that Indiana bourbon, or the guys in Bardstown, or all these big companies making tons of bourbon that's going out by the barrel to other brands. When we started, it wasn't really the case. So we chose to go the route of making clear spirits to keep the lights on and keep the bills paid while the bourbon was aging. Now, there's some brands who just do nothing and they say, hey, this bourbon's going to be released in 7 years and we're not going to make a dime for 7 years. But we were independently supported. All the capital from the distillery is provided by local families and investors in St. Augustine, not big banks. So it wasn't really an option for us. But through that journey of making these clear spirits, we've realized they're an important part of our portfolio. If you ask Zach and I, what are you? We'd probably say we're a bourbon brand, but there's plenty of us who know us as that sugarcane vodka brand or that fantastic gin that I fell in love with. And, we think all of our products are representative of the state of Florida. That's the goal for us. We're not trying to mimic something else. We want to make things that are unique to our region. And the vodka and gin are good examples of that. They utilize a sugarcane based neutral spirit. It's produced from a byproduct of sugar manufacturing, a molasses essentially. And in the case of our gin, we have a really Florida-inspired recipe that uses citrus and a dozen botanicals to make something that is bright and citrus forward. And as we've run for this last decade, we've realized the importance of having this variety in our flavor profile, specifically at the facility. When you see us leading courses in the market and stuff like that, it tends to be typically bourbon, but the products are available. You can get our vodka, gin, rum throughout the state, a lot of our partners, but particularly in the distillery, folks come in, they may not drink brown spirits and they may fall in love with our Florida Mule and may love our spin on a gin and tonic or whatever the case is. So we think it'll always be important to have those as part of our lineup. But I want to say it was kind of a stopgap to get to the bourbon, but it was intentional to begin with those spirits. So you have something to serve and something to sell.
I always find it interesting because obviously bourbon has exploded in popularity recently.
Really? I didn't know that.
And pretty much, and much to my wife's great pleasure, pretty much everybody has old fashions available at all times. Was it sort of fortuitous that you and the team at St. Augustine Distillery really wanted to go in bourbon heavy and just had to put it in barrels and wait? Or was that always what you wanted, popularity be ignored?
I think our timing was pretty in line with the bourbon boom. I mean, the signs were there that it was taking off even when we were getting started. So it wasn't by happenstance that we ended up making that spirit, but we also loved it. Our owners were infatuated with bourbon. They had taken some trips to areas of the country that had more craft distillery offerings, Pacific Northwest, up in New York. And, they kind of toured around the nation. And then, of course, spent a lot of time with the big brands in Kentucky and the Bourbon Trail and stuff like that. And I think it's a mix of it being such an important spirit to our country, a spirit that is produced domestically that had potential to be premium, right? When you look outside of that, as well as a cognac, is a tequila, none of those are American. And then just something that we knew there was still area to make it our own, right? Bourbon is a pretty consistent spirit. There's a lot of regulations that go into it, what you have to make it from, how you have to make it and all that stuff. But there's a lot of creativity too. What the remainder of your grain recipe is going to be outside of corn, where you're going to source your grains. In the case of our distillery, we're producing bourbon on a pot still, which is a little unusual. Typically, it's done on a large continuous column. So we thought there was a lot of room for us to make a Florida style bourbon. And, we've been doing it for 10 years and we're still figuring things out. But I think the product speaks for itself when you try it. It's unique. You can tell there's heart and soul in every bottle. And I think that's what drew us to bourbon. It's just a special thing.
Mm-hmm. Now, I'll be perfectly honest with you. I was years ago under the impression that part of what made bourbon was it could only be produced in Kentucky. It's obviously very incorrect. But do you still get people that come in and say, you produce a bourbon here? This is Florida.
Every day.
What do you usually say to that?
When you come through and do the tours, you can always, when you're up at the stanchions right next to the bottling room and you're staring at production, you can always talk to any of us distillers. And that's probably the number one question we get each day. We also do a social media series called Ask a Distiller. We just covered that question not long ago. It'll be getting posted soon. But in short, this is a very big misconception. A lot of that used to be marketing that, quality bourbon or bourbon just in general came from Kentucky. But in fact, in 1964, the American government signed into legislation stating that bourbon is an American-made product. Gotcha. And there's a couple ways you can look at that. I'm not going to get too nerdy on you, but a lot of people call it the ABCs of bourbon. The A is American, it has to be made on American soil. B is a brand new charred oak container. And then C is corn. So your mash bill must be at least 51% corn. And that's just, in my opinion, one of the easiest, simplest ways to remember what bourbon is.
But yeah, we still get it every single day. I got a lovely voicemail from a gentleman. He wasn't even visiting the distillery. He was in Jacksonville for something, watching a daytime talk show in the morning. And we'll just say he had a very thick Kentucky accent. And this fine gentleman asked me, how the hell do you call it bourbon if you make it in Florida? And we got to have a nice little chat, and I invited him to come down to the distillery. I don't know if he ever made it, but it's pervasive, right? It's years of marketing, and those large distilleries, they knew even beyond 1964 that it could be made anywhere. But a lot of the marketing was angled as it's not bourbon if it's not Kentucky bourbon, right?
Exactly.
And that stuff's impactful. We all are byproducts of what we've been marketed during the years. But it's changed a lot. I think consumers are more educated than ever, right? And it's thanks to podcasts like your own and the resources available on the internet. And people are just smart. And I think that has encouraged the industry to be more transparent than ever. And that's a big focus for us. There's no smoke and mirrors in what we do. If you have a question, you want to learn about our processes, chances are we're going to tell you. And that's what excites me. As a bourbon nerd and enthusiast, it's why I'm here, right? I met the owner of St. Augustine Distillery day 2 of them opening because I heard some crazy dude was making bourbon in Florida, and I hauled ass from Tampa and said, I'm going to meet him. And sure enough, he was a wonderful guy. Phil McDaniel spent a couple hours with me, and I know now in my position just how busy he was. And I fell in love with the idea from day one. And I think what draws people to bourbon is the same thing that draws people to good coffee or fine cigars. It's the vast amount of information you can learn for decades and still not know it all. But then there's something that you can slow down and enjoy with friends and loved ones. And it's a way to create memories, right? And that's what's so special about what we produce to me. It's not how good the products are, and they are, Zach, good job.
Yes.
But it's the stories we get from are fans, right? And they say, I took home a bottle of the Saint and we opened it for my father's 90th birthday.
Yeah.
And what is cooler than that?
Yeah. I've gotten those stories just walking into Total Wine, and I book it from work to Total Wine because I got to buy alcohol or something like that. And I'm still in all my distillery gear, and somebody will walk up and say, hey, I had so-and-so product from your distillery. And just like Will said, we opened at so-and-so's birthday, or we were celebrating this event. And it warms your heart. It reminds you why you're so passionate about this industry and why you keep on showing up every day.
That's amazing. And it kind of dovetails into my next question, which is you don't have just here's our bourbon. You've got a lot of different products. You mentioned the Saint, which I'd love to talk to you about. I know that personally, we still have a bottle of bourbon that was finished in port barrels from San Sebastian. So it's much more than just the individual bottles. You have a wide range at this point.
Absolutely.
You want to take it?
Yeah. Is there a bourbon you like to start with?
Let's start with the Saint, because you mentioned that.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Saint is definitely one of our more premium bourbons. That's one that was kind of a fun experiment years ago as we were developing our old-fashioned mix. We would send off our old-fashioned mix to a gentleman who would age them in barrels, and then he would dump that mix out, send the mix back to us, and send the barrel back. And we didn't know what to do at the time. And so Phil, one of our owners, had a brilliant idea of let's put some whiskey in it, see what happens. So we did that. And as the time moves on, we've been checking them at different ages and stuff. Like we were just working on the 2024 batch of Saint yesterday, and it has just over a year of age on it. And they just get better and better.
A year of age in the finishing barrel.
Yes, a year of age in the finishing barrel. Sorry, we take at least a minimum of a 4-year-old bourbon, and then we place that bourbon into the old-fashioned barrels to finish it, to add that extra flavor, that depth, the complexity.
So it's kind of funny, the origin of the Saint kind of lies with our relationship with Total Wine. And they reached out to us. This is just as bourbon was exploding. And they're saying, look, we can't keep Pappy and Weller in stock. And we really think if you guys can make something on the high end, we can move it. And you got to remember, our bourbon was like 2 years old at this time. And we're like, all right, guys, what are you talking about? We're lucky to get what we charge. And sure enough, as Zach said, we utilize these barrels that are really proprietary, right? We work on this mix, and it's a blend of several types of bitters, Florida sugar, water. It's really authentic to what you'd put in an old fashioned. We just kind of take the work out of it. And then we'll empty those barrels when they're still fresh, fill them with bourbon to create what I would call an old fashioned finished bourbon.
Yeah.
And that kind of ties in with the port finish. We are essentially a one mash bill distillery. We have one grain recipe. And the guys have actually started playing around in the last couple of years. But so far, everything we've released, one grain recipe, always distilled by us, always aged by us, et cetera. And the way we create additional items or additional SKUs in the portfolio is almost entirely through finishing or single barrel selection. And what makes our finished products so desirable, in my opinion, is that the guys work to get fresh barrels. So we talked about the old fashioned. In the case of the port finish that you have, we're getting those barrels from the winery usually a day or two after they were empty.
Oh yeah.
And one of my favorite parts about that program, we've had the same, 18 barrels in rotation. There's a little over a dozen barrels that have just been exchanged between our distillery and the winery since we started making the product. And they love it because their port gets a lot of bourbon characteristic and influence. And we love it for the same reasons for our bourbon. Our port finished bourbon, to me, if you taste it against the other guys, there's no comparison. You get the flavor, the ripe red fruits that come through from the port, and the product gets the color too. I'm looking at a bottle here, and it's bright red, and it's really unique. And last year we released our toasted finished bourbon, which is another finishing process. It goes into barrels that were lightly toasted, and we've done a lot of them. We launched our Explorers collection a couple years back, which is kind of a premium line that pays tribute to Zach and the team working with partners all over the world to get some of these exotic finishing casks when they're still fresh and great. So we started with a cognac finished bourbon, then we did a Curacao, just recently did a sherry finished bourbon, and we've got some more stuff on the horizon there too. But it's fun. It allows us to create new products utilizing existing stock of aged bourbon that we have.
Absolutely.
That's amazing. So if you have somebody who's fresh off the trolley, they don't really know anything about bourbon, but they know it's big and they want to know where to start, where would be the best place for them to get started with bourbon at St. Augustine Distillery?
Honestly, we probably started with an old fashioned. and kind of acclimate the palate and stuff. And then we take you through the journey. And I tend to move up the proof ladder versus moving up the price ladder, because it's more about what your palate can enjoy. And a lot of that is teaching people how to taste, right? Not just knocking it back like it was a shot, understanding, hey, you're going to want to take a small sip. You're going to swish it around and kind of acclimate your taste buds.
It's not a shot, it's a journey.
Yeah, exactly. And, so we may try our old fashioned, then we may try our Florida straight, which is our small batch offering at 88 proof. And then from there, we may go to our toasted finish at 94 proof and the port at 102, and then working our way up to cask strength offerings. But for us, it's all about what you like and enjoy. I mean, we say it all day. The best way to drink your bourbon is the way you want. So we're not going to be the type to say, hey, no ice, you got to have it neat or whatever it is. So I think we try to learn from the visitor, and if you're an enthusiast and you drink only cask strength, whatever, well, we know where we can begin. If you're just getting into bourbon and you like things on the softer side, maybe enjoy weeded bourbons, we think we've got an option for you there too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think it just depends on the person and what you're looking to enjoy.
And that's one thing that I love is, aside from this large opportunity of choices that we have throughout our bourbons, like Will was saying, as far as all those casks that we get in, it's, you might have heard this at another distillery before, all these different casks that we use our warehouses, and through these opportunities and choices that we have in bourbons, it's like building a spice rack. So, what kind of spices do you like? How do you like your dish per se, or your bourbon? So we have a lot to really curate and help get people started.
Gotcha. And obviously, we've been speaking about bourbon, and it's a particular favorite of all of ours, but we are in Florida. And if anybody's going to say that this state has an official state spirit, I think that spirit's going to be rum.
No, you're crazy.
But you're not just doing bourbon stuff. You got some fun stuff coming up on the rum front, if I'm correct.
For sure. Yeah. So rum it's a passion for us, right? And a lot of our distillers in particular are really passionate about rum. And we produce all of our rum using Florida molasses, which we love because it's created every day as a byproduct from sugar manufacturing. So kind of a sustainability component to use the molasses. And then it's aged in our bourbon barrels. And we're one of very few distilleries that actually ages rum in their own bourbon barrels. Plenty of people age rum in bourbon barrels, but usually sourced from other distilleries. And we have had, when we began, we launched what was called Discovery Series. So it was 4 different iterations of our rum utilizing different molasses and yeast strains. And based on consumer preference, we landed on one particular one. And that's been our pot distilled rum that we've had since pretty early on in our company. And then over the years, we've been able to release some new limited rum offerings that are typically distillery exclusive. So we made our D. Rodriguez and Sons Overproof rum, which we made in celebration of Danny Rodriguez, who's Day One Danny that Zach spoke on earlier. And it's it's an overproof rum, so not aged, really, was 126.
126, yeah.
Yep. Great for like classic rum cocktails, daiquiris, etc. And, Danny's so important to us. He's been with the company since before we were even running the stills. And the bottle itself celebrates Danny and his Honduran heritage. So we're proud of that rum. We're getting ready to transition into what we call rum season. The guys produce all of our rum for a period of about 8 weeks in the summertime. That aligns with when grain quality kind of backs off a little bit. So we ensure we're using the best grain when we're making whiskey. And one of my favorite facts about why they make rum in the summer is, well, the molasses is easier to pour.
Yeah.
And I remember the distiller like, why do we do rum in the summer? He's like, let me show you. And he opened up the top of a molasses tote and out it came pretty quickly. So sometimes it's just practicality. But one of my favorite rums we did a couple years ago, and we've done a couple of batches, is our Stone's Throw rum. So it is aged entirely in port wine casks. Oh, wow. So it's a really rich, really full flavor, kind of reddish looking rum. And if you're a cigar smoker, it's like the ultimate. It stands up super well as your palate kind of degrades from cigars. We're always looking for something a little more flavorful. So in our lineup, it's either the Saint or that Stone's Throw rum. Mm-hmm. But this year, at the tail end of our rum season, which is looking like it'll probably be towards the end of July, we're going to be releasing our reserve rum. And I don't want to speak too much on it because it was our head of production's creation and we haven't really announced it yet. But we'll just say it's kind of an adopting of a lot of the finishing processes we've learned for bourbon into a really spectacular rum product.
That sounds amazing. I definitely cannot wait to get back to the distillery again. I've got plenty of stuff to ask you, but I do believe that we are at time, so I will definitely look forward to bringing you both back on the show, hopefully in the very near future, hopefully in person. We'll see.
Yeah, stop into the distillery.
That'd be great.
Awesome. Thank you both so much. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you, sir.
To be perfectly honest with you, this really is part one of the conversation with Zach and Will, because there's two major things with St. Augustine Distillery that we did not get the chance to talk about, and I will get them back on a future episode to discuss that. Those two things are, of course, the ice plant, which is their restaurant on the second floor of the distillery, and also the newly opened City Gate Spirits, which is a brand new separate distillery right on St. George Street, very much steps away from the old city gates. We have plenty of things to discuss. I cannot wait for them to come back on the episode. I will say it is an absolutely fantastic place to go, and if you do want a unique souvenir that you cannot find anywhere else, they do have the bourbon filling experience where they have set aside a barrel of bourbon that will not be blended, and for a nominal fee, you will go through all the steps of filling that bottle yourself, writing your name in the book of people that have filled their bottles from the barrel. It is an absolutely amazing and unique experience, and definitely not something to be missed. Next week, we will be back with another episode. It is not alcoholic in any way, shape, or form, but is possibly one of the coolest stories that I've ever featured here on the Florida Beer Podcast. So if you want more information on St. Augustine Distillery, or you're looking forward to the next episode, or you want to listen to some of our other episodes from St. Augustine and beyond, by all means, the best place to do that is to follow us on social media. We are at Florida Beer Blog on Instagram, X, Threads, and Blue Sky. We are FL Beer Blog on Facebook. You can find us on the internet at floridabeerblog.com and floridabeerpodcast.com, and you can always reach out to us at floridabeerblog@gmail.com. We are a proud member of the Florida Podcast Network, a collection of amazing Florida-based podcasts, and you can find more about them at floridapodcastnetwork.com. We are available on pretty much every podcasting app you can think of. Apple Podcasts, we're on Amazon Podcasts, so you can ask your smart device to play the Florida Beer Podcast, and our latest episode will come up immediately. We're on Spotify, iHeartRadio, the list goes on and on. You can find us pretty much everywhere. Make sure to subscribe so that you get the latest episodes when they come out. If you can, please leave a nice 5-star rating on the podcasting app of your choice, even if it's YouTube, because we're there. That'll help us get the word out to everyone else. Our intro announcer is Jeff Brozovich. Field producer is Steve Pekala. Executive producer for the Florida Podcast Network and Grand High Poobah is Jemmy Legagneur. This is David Butler, your host and author. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much to the St. Augustine Distillery folks for the amazing hospitality and giving us your time and letting us tell your story. And we will be back next week with another episode of the Florida Beer Podcast. Thank you so much for listening, and drink Florida craft.